Hey guys, not only am I talking about The Last of Us Part 2 in this video, but this is also a Part 2 video. It's not a big deal if you haven't seen the first part, but I will be talking about and bringing up some of the points I made about The Last of Us in the last video, as this entire series is kind of me finding out what is the best medium and execution of the world and story of The Last of Us, something thousands of people hold near and dear to their hearts, including me now. So, without further ado, it's time to talk about the most controversial of The Last of Us properties. So where did we leave off? Naughty Dog had just raked in tons of cash off their back-to-back killer successes of Uncharted 3 in 2011, The Last of Us in 2013 and 2014, and of course, Uncharted 4 in 2016, which up to this episode of this series was and might remain my favorite Naughty Dog game. To say that they were on a golden run would be the biggest understatement of all time. Uncharted 4 alone was raking in millions of copies just in the year it came out. And after what was considered the main team finished their slam dunk of a perfect mix of Uncharted 4's unique movie-style video game storytelling, the entire creative forces of The Last of Us and the Uncharted series would come together to work on a sequel to what would be their most impressive and lofty game yet. Well, almost the whole team. There was another small team put together, the actual quote-unquote B team, and was given very little budget to put out Uncharted Lost Legacy, which was almost a DLC and almost a fifth game, so what we ended up with was unfortunately not very good at all, and probably the worst thing the studio has ever put out. And even then, it's not that bad, it's just, like I said in the last video, not very engaging. But I digress. Neil Druckmann, still the creative director of his passion project turned wild success, wrote the script for it, this time joined by Haley Gross, along with the help of co-director Anthony Newman and Kurt Margenau. This time, instead of showing how far a character would go for the ones they love as a main theme, the two came up with the idea to almost mirror the topic and go for how far you would go to bring justice to someone you love, and what even qualifies as justice, as well as answering several thematic questions the first game left open. This game would take a lot more violent and brutal look at the world, and the way it would explore said violence is said to have been inspired by Druckmann's experience growing up in Israel, where violence is a frequent topic. On the whole, they wanted the story and gameplay to be a lot more ambitious and engaging for the players. They wanted the players to, quote, thirst for revenge so much that they wouldn't realize their actions until after they do them, just like the character. And the entire story, while taking a darker nature, also leans a lot more empathetic in its story, which I'll get into more later. Unfortunately, for as big and sprawling of a story they wanted to cover, given the full range of the PS4 technology, especially this late into its lifespan, combined with the merging of two major teams, and a little thing called, COVID-19, made working on the later half of this game pretty hard. And despite work going into this game as early as 2014, the game wouldn't come out until 2020, with delays continuing to pile up after its 2019 release date announcement. But what's more unfortunate is the fact that this put workers into a major crunch, the studio asking them to pull 12-hour days frequently all throughout the latter half of development. Conditions were so bad for the developers that allegedly several team members hoped that the game would fail, so it would show the studio and other studios that these work conditions were just not viable. Druckmann stating he felt very badly for the conditions and how the employees were used, but unfortunately, the game was extremely hyped up, and as you can imagine, it pulled crazy numbers crazy fast, leading to an unfortunate precedent and standard in the game development industry, with honestly terrible conditions and hours that also extend to the movie industry as CGI has become more relied on. That's not really the topic of this video, but it is actually a really unfortunate side effect of mismanagement of a good piece of art that set a precedent that actively hurts artists and the talent behind so many major pieces of art, both in the video game industry and the movie industry. and one of the few things that actually truly sours me to this game going into it. But this game took off, becoming the fastest selling PS4 exclusive game behind such recent titles as God of War and Marvel's Spider-Man. It had one of the biggest game launches ever physically and digitally, and became the third best-selling game of the year within 2 weeks. Overall, it landed as the third best-selling game of pretty much all time, especially in the UK, where it outsold its predecessor by 76%. It was lightning in a bottle, just like the first game, but this time with slightly different reception. As often happens with sequels to very popular pieces of art, there were a lot of expectations, and I do mean a lot, from the players. And especially with this game, despite landing in a much more progressive world than the original 2013 one, there's still a lot of people who pretty much completely missed the entire point of the story, and simply hated all the big changes and thematic beats the team was going for. It still pulled in a crazy response from most major critic sites, and even brought in more prestigious awards than The Last of Us had previously, but the reputation as someone on gaming social media at the time was that it was bad and a joke, and especially that Abby was ugly and stupid, lots of making fun of the sex scene, trans and lesbian characters, oh no, and Joel being dead is the worst thing that they could ever do, oh my gosh, how dare they touch Joel. Which, yeah, a lot of these are very big cans of worms unto themselves, but especially that last one, like, yeah, that's the point, that's what the game was going for. But anyway, even as the dust settles, this game is not nearly as beloved as its predecessors, and many people consider it to be a game not even worth playing. But especially with the recent release of this show bringing the older games back into light some, the reputation has definitely swung a lot more positive, but still not nearly hitting the overall love and respect that the first game has. A lot of people still refusing to engage with it. But again, as I mentioned in the last video, I only played both of these recently, like very recently, and I tried to approach them with as open of a mind as I could, trying to remove that bad reputation and really any reputations I have heard of going into them, and especially not being fully satisfied with my experience of the original game, and even one of my favorite video game YouTubers making a video about why it fundamentally doesn't work for him, funnily enough bringing up a lot of the complaints I had about the first Last of Us. I was absolutely blown away by this game. So let's talk about it. This time, unlike the last video, I want to start out talking about the gameplay, as I feel like there's not as much to talk about with it this time, especially comparing it to the first game. The gameplay in this is effectively more or less the same as the first. You have a developing gun system that grows with upgrades and new weapons as you move through a linear world and gain supplies to craft resources and do stealth. And this time they have even more, as you don't just play as Ellie, you also play as Abby, which, yes, you play as Joel and Ellie in the first game, and there are some things that you kind of quote-unquote build Ellie's arsenal for that one section, but it's a very small section of the game, and in this game you spend about equal halves between our two antagonists, characters. So you have a system that pretty much has to reset for the Abby section of the game, because while you do play as her sometimes throughout the opening of the game, outside of walking through basic mechanics, it's mostly just movement and interaction, not developing skills as a playable character until the second half where you take over her fully, where at this point, you're pretty much used to a fully upgraded murder machine Ellie. Also guys, I really apologize for my voice this video. It is really cold. I just taught several classes, which always messes up my voice, and I am kind of sickly, so if my voice sounds weird and I sound like I'm losing my voice, it's only because I kind of am. Sorry. So they have a much bigger load on their shoulders, and yet while some of the same problems are still there, I think there's a lot in this game that makes it effortlessly better. Obviously, you still have the looting, which is more or less annoying and bad. It's not good in the first game, and it's not good here. But honestly, I didn't mind it here as much, and I think one of the major reasons for that is it felt a lot more optional in this one. Maybe it was realizing it didn't matter as much in the first game, or the fact that this game is a lot more rich, and the PS4 has a lot more ability to have small, detailed storytelling and atmosphere, but it just didn't feel like the game was yelling at me to go check out every building. Like when we first get to Seattle with Ellie and the most amazing character in fiction, Dina, there's a lot of ground you can cover and a lot of things you can learn, or you can just check out the stuff that will most likely lead you to the next section of the game. And especially with the introduction of horses to get around a lot faster, and a map, and lots of fun story bits, it just felt a lot more compelling to actually look around. And when the constant pressing of triangle got boring, I simply moved on to where I wanted to go for the story. Again, this is still not a good mechanic in the game. I think it would be better if you didn't just have to walk around pressing triangle on everything, but at the same time, this game uses it in a lot more enjoyable way than the first game, in my opinion. Doubly on this point, they make the game, in my opinion, a lot more balanced when it comes to combat. Unlike the first game, pretty much nothing but big bads can kill you in one hit, and they added a dodge and a melee even without weapons, so you can realistically make it through combat encounters without relying as much on gathering resources that you would always run out of space for. And for the question of doesn't this take away from the quote-unquote survival nature of the games, which first off, no, these games aren't survival games, and second, I actually felt a lot more engaged with that idea in this one, because they also made this game actually scary this time around. In the first game, I don't think I'm ever really scared at all. It's a zombie game, and there's just not much, despite its aesthetics and gore, that actually make it brutal or scary to play. Because of the technology for lighting on the PS4, they don't have too many dark sections, and where there are, you just have the listen mechanic that pretty much shows you all of the danger all of the time, making even the most scary of encounters to me not that, scary. But stretching the amount of side characters we have that we actually care about who can die, we also have a much quote-unquote worse listening system. I actually think the listening system is better, it just listens worse, which even fully upgraded doesn't give you the precision the first game did. And you have a lot more horror-leaning direction and writing, with a lot more on-screen gore, and a darker tone to match with the equally darker, almost always raining world. And most importantly, there are enemies that don't pop up with your listen, with stalkers not showing up and having a much more aggressive AI, to the freaking infected later in the game stuck in the walls. Those guys are scary and made me waste so much resources just shooting every body I saw stuck to the wall. The game pretty early on gets you on your toes even while doing some more menial looting. I felt it was just a lot more engaging on the whole. There are also a lot more personal details, a lot more intelligent AIs, and a lot more just fun flexing touches, like the weapon upgrade system, which, while I wish there was a skip button sometimes with how long it takes, is truly really fun and really immersive to me. Seeing how you actually fix it up and change the guns as the game goes on, while also keeping any aesthetic change you make seamlessly in its transition back to gameplay, it just feels like a game that cares about the little things a lot, as they are a lot more key to their goal of pulling into the players with a completely immersive experience to get lost in the anger and sadness these characters are experiencing. And I really have no other major complaints about the mechanics, except for, again, the looting and the always pressing triangle to interact with everything. And again, in this game, it just comes off as a lot more bearable, especially just coming off the first game. The combat is a lot more slick and enjoyable, with increased ability for viable stealth and an amazing improvement in the smoothness of motion and actual creative decisions on how you approach different encounters, and a lot more consistent change to the status quo depending on who you're with, or the drastic, ever-changing environments, compared to the mostly samey feeling ones from the first game, which is actually kind of impressive since the game mostly takes place in Seattle, and the first game you're traveling entirely cross-country. And even the pill upgrade system feels a lot more natural with the increased amount of upgrade slots. Just the surprising smoothness of the transition of Abby to making Abby much more strong and well-equipped character to Ellie right out of the gate, leaning into her anger, and hit first, ask questions later mentality working with the wolves has imbued her with. I think the biggest example of when I was really blown away by the mechanics themselves and how they interact with the world was towards the end of the story when the war with the Scars and Wolves is raging on, and it just felt so visceral and immersive to me. I felt like I was actually seeing a brutal, unneeded, misunderstood war happening all around me. And the fight with that one guy who just won't die until you've lost all of your weapons is genuinely one of the only times a video game has ever gotten me sick to my stomach. Not even just from the graphic gore, because arguably I've played worse, but just from how immersed I was and this mindset of how bad and brutal this was and how much I wanted to protect the characters I was with. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. And to this point, I had been dealing with an onslaught of fire from both sides of the war where I genuinely felt like I couldn't move, but it also wasn't hard enough that it was impossible without having to rely on some extremely overpowered element to get me through so many enemies like the previous game. And now with the Abby that I've actually grown to love, having to brutally kill someone after being shown time and time again by the story that this brutality and nonsensical killing is wrong for so many reasons, I just felt sick to my stomach at what I was forced to do to keep two people who I didn't even want to be involved in this war safe. That was kind of the moment that I knew that this was more or less a perfect blend of these kind of mechanics to the story it was telling. I still don't think the mechanics are perfect, and they could honestly be a lot better if they just moved away from this style of game, which is why I understand the Nakey Jakey video talking about how this game design is kind of outdated. I would agree with that. But at the same time, for using this system, I think this is about as perfect of a blend as you can get. You have great movement, a great gun system, a lot more interacting and natural feeling interaction with the mechanics to the world and the tension of the story, so I'm actually on edge for certain infected sections, and just a lot more viable and good feeling options to move around and engage with the world. I actually love how it feels to just be in the game, despite how much it makes you hate yourself for loving it. It's kind of brilliant. And a lot of that has to do with this game's, in my opinion, much richer, deeper, and smarter story. The story of this game, as I've said, is a lot more ambitious than the first, and to me, a lot more impactful personally. Partially, I'm sure, because you have this switch between young Ellie and surrogate dad Joel to now young adult Ellie working with other young adults most of the time. And as a recent young adult myself, the world and the story already feels so much more made for me than the first. But in order to talk about this story and what it ends up meaning to me, the first thing we have to do is look at our first main character, Ellie, and what's different about her. The first most perceivable difference between her character design in this game is, yes, she's older, leaning not only into the whole game for young adults thing, but also into the more mature nature of the story in general. Which, before you question me on, the most mature topic the first game brings up is mostly, is it moral to kill during apocalypse? This game brings with it a lot more layered and mature characters facing a wide variety of problems, both continuing that same question about killing for survival and taking it to its most extremes through different emotional lenses, along with topics of sexuality, identity, animal harm, forgiveness, trauma, and just, well, a lot more mature approach to the storytelling this time around, much like the Uncharted series often tried to go for, with its later installments like Uncharted 3 and Uncharted 4. The second thing I want to look at that's different about our main character is that thing on her arm. She has a tattoo now. In-game, brought to our attention very early on by love interest Dina, talking about how Ellie's ex was the one who did it for her, which is very unique and honestly, I think, an important context point to look at the tattoo's importance to the story. Because honestly, I think the tattoo that Ellie carries with her perfectly distills the heart and soul and even the message that the entire game is going for in a really unique and beautiful way. So in order to really talk about how it does this, or really get into the story in any meaningful way at all, the best thing we can do is summarize and talk about how the story progresses itself. The game opens up on, believe it or not, a picture of a moth that is the same moth that's part of Ellie's tattoo, carved into the neck of a guitar that Joel is cleaning, as Joel gives a fateful recap of the previous game's story to his brother Tommy, this time taking extra focus in the scene on the one doctor who is going to operate on Ellie that you end up killing. Remember him, he's important, as Joel recounts with certainty that he saved her, as he is shown to brutally massacre the Fireflies, which, by the way, also remember the name of all these factions too, they're kind of important. You can see the immediate correlation between Firefly and Moth, a creature that creates light and a creature that desperately chases light, even to its own detriment sometimes. A hop, skip, and a horse ride and the opening credits later, we arrive back at Jackson, the proverbial promised land from the first game that Tommy runs with his wife as they're trying to reform some kind of normal, non-barbaric society. And Joel promises that he would do everything the same if he ever had the chance. And we get reintroduced to Ellie, still looking pretty young, as these opening cutscenes take place pretty close after the events of the first game, as Joel finally sings for her like he promised in the first game, as the guilt and doubt hang over them. He gives her the guitar and starts to teach her how to play, tells an awkward bad joke, and then leaves, and we get our title card. Again, take note that the first thing on screen is the moth, which also appears in the loading screen, even though the physical moths almost never have anything to do with the story itself. So if you think I'm making some kind of a leap to say that the tattoo has symbolic importance and relevance to the story, well, I kind of am, but also I'm not. We time jump 4 years ahead to our older tattooed Ellie getting woken up by her friend Jessie. He messes with her for kissing his ex the night before, Dina, so close to when they broke up, immediately endearing us not only to Jessie, but their relationship as friends, as he seems to keep a pretty joking air around him. We go around Jackson, meeting people and petting a dog, and getting a general sense of the relationships and conflict of our first main cast of characters, along with strong implications to the party the night before, at which Dina kissed Ellie and Joel got into a fight with a homophobic guy, all to Ellie's discomfort. It was a consensual kiss, just awkward because she was friends with her and with Jessie. Anyway, and we finally get to Dina, the greatest character put to video game screen, and just the best representation for bisexuals ever, probably. She's playing with kids, you get in a snowball fight and learn some more of the game mechanics, and because of the meddling of her friends, she's put on a patrol route with you, and you both head out. More horse riding, more Jessie, then we cut to black. We now get a pan over a cold cabin and its residents, none of which we recognize from the first game. We stop on a strong featured woman as she can't sleep, and we are introduced to our second set of players. We meet Abby and Owen. They seem to be on a mission towards Jackson to find someone, and you can quickly grab from their conversations to figure out that who they're looking for is none other than our very own questionable father figure Joel. And we instantly get tuned into Abby as a character as she angrily runs off without anyone else to go find him, as we run into a bunch of infected and learn the much appreciated dodging, which also gets us into her being the first person to introduce us to this dodging and melee system, that she is strong and determined no matter what. She is a physical presence, again much more naturally working us into the mechanics. But I digress. Skip ahead a bunch, Ellie and Dina find that Joel and Tommy are not where they're supposed to be, and as Abby you run into them fighting a massive horde, they save you, there's a big snowstorm, and no one can move anymore, so Ellie and Dina get high and have sex while waiting it out, but then our boy Jesse walks in and scolds them for slacking off on their responsibilities, and it's also super awkward because, again, the relationship between the three of them. Abby leads them to the cabin where her crew is hiding, and things go bad fast, as you can imagine. Ellie, of course, instantly runs off to find them as Joel and Tommy realize more increasingly that this is not very good for them. And Ellie shows up to the cabin just in time to get captured and be there as Joel is killed by a brutal and angry Abby right in front of us. Not even with a gun, as often is used for more quote-unquote sympathetic killings throughout the series. No, they all beat him to death, and Abby dealing the final blow with a golf club. We get a little aftermath that both Ellie and Tommy want to leave the group to go avenge Joel's death, and Tommy has already gone, and Ellie is quickly coming after him, with Dina insisting on going with her. Around the 2-hour mark into the game, and we finally get going on the actual plot, which, well, is pretty long to actually get into the game. It cues us up pretty precisely for the kind of story this is going to be, and who it's going to be about. Messy humans. Immediately, especially from the interactions with Dina and Ellie throughout the opening, we get something so much more humanistic and real feeling than anything in the very Children of Men feeling opening from the first game. Not only, again, does it feel more young adulty in the way the relationships and conflicts are portrayed, but it also shows through Ellie, Dina, and Jesse that all kinds of love are messy. And on top of that, because this game features two protagonists/antagonists, introducing us to the story through both of them and then switching to essentially fully Ellie afterwards, subverting my expectations for the major shift of tone in the second half in general. All I knew was Joel was dead, Ellie was hurt, Dina is here, and we all need to be safe, so I'm going to kill every last person I need to. Throughout our time in Seattle, the locations we've tracked our mysterious group of killers to is mostly spent on investigating, tracking, and killing members of that party, one by one on the quest to figure out where Abby is hiding. And this gets more and more dicey. There are bigger threats here than Ellie thought. Harder infected, more soldiers, two different factions doing their own thing, and on top of that, after all of this very well plot-driven investigation and killing, with again much more brutal tone as people scream for mercy and scream when they see their friends die, Dina has been getting increasingly sick more and more often, and it turns out that she is pregnant with Jesse's kid, adding to the list in Ellie's mind of things that she just can't process that come back out in hostility, because she was raised largely by Joel, a violent killer who doesn't express his emotions well. We also, in the middle of this, get flashbacks to Joel taking Ellie to a museum 3 years earlier, a dinosaur and space museum, her two favorite things at the time, grounding us back and reminding us of why it matters to us as a player as Ellie. These moments are really electric in the cinematic way we go about the moon landing sequence, showing that bright and shining Ellie that was in the first game, that had such a joy for life when she had purpose, honestly got me really emotional, even though I've never really been on the Joel bandwagon. So she gets mad at Dina for even coming and determinedly storms off on her own, leaving Dina to do some god-tier tracking while pregnant, no less. And as we get a reminder of the reasons we are here, the hurt and pain Ellie has gone through, the game kicks up the brutality even more as they introduce enemy dogs. This game just a lot more effortlessly introduces us to these elements of the world tonally through the combined efforts of the script and the gameplay. It's honestly incredible, because really one of the first major signs that maybe we're not doing the right thing here is that you have to kill dogs and they yelp and it's sad. And just as things are getting real dicey, our good friend Jesse shows up, as they also hear that Tommy, who made his way out here earlier, is stirring up trouble. We get more flashbacks, teaching us some new mechanics and getting us more endeared to these characters and disillusioned to our actions as we steamroll through the city, always returning to our home base theater with Dina, and continuing to build on the conflicts from the previous game, as Ellie had argued with Joel about what happened with the Fireflies. Finally, we find out, after even more brutalization and humanization of our enemies that we as players and Ellie forcibly ignore, as these young adults we are tracking and to some extent torturing, just like Joel did in the first game, that Abby is hiding out in the aquarium across town. As we also find out that Ellie had known from a recording that she found that there actually was a cure possible from her, and she finally confronted Joel about it, getting him to tell her the truth, making her feel furious and betrayed, and cluing us into why she was even more distant with Joel than at the end of the first game. But she still loves him, despite everything. And even though she doesn't know why, she has to push more and more and more to get to Abby. She starts to kill more and more. The game makes you personally beat somebody to death. One of the few times I really wasn't feeling the emotion of Ellie, because at this point she has become just as bad as Abby, and just as bad as Joel. She makes it to the aquarium by herself, finding very few people and some medical supplies. We kill another dog. We no longer like what Ellie is doing, and I was literally like eyebrows raised on the edge of my seat because I didn't want Ellie to do anything else reckless and get people around her hurt. She finds Owen and the one person that objected to the way that they killed Joel, Mel, and we still ask them about Abby. And she does something that Joel taught her to do, where you pull someone aside and you give them a chance to answer the question. Then without showing the other person their answer, you ask the other person the same question. And you know if they're telling the truth. But it goes wrong, and Owen attacks. We kill him. Mel attacks. We kill her with her own knife, stabbing her through the throat. And Ellie realizes, after getting no information out of them, that Mel was pregnant. Then the realization of all that she's done starts to crash on her. She can't breathe, and Jesse and Tommy show up. They take her back to the theater to rest. And then, just as things seem like they might start to be okay again, Abby shows up, killing Jesse right in front of us, and threatening to kill Tommy. So Ellie surrenders as we push in on Abby's face, filled with anger. Cut to black. That was the first half of the game. A brutal and heartbreaking descent into essentially becoming a monster. I think it's always interesting in zombie stories that this is often a theme. The zombies are just mindless. They feel nothing, they act without malicious intent. In fact, I would almost say at certain points in this game, they are almost even framed as sympathetic. Again, despite this game's brutality, it's so much more empathetic to counter it. But the idea that this mass threat brings out so much of the monsters in us is shown through so many different lenses, as all of these characters are forced to do what they have to save people. But this game starts to push back against the fact that you can do this without consequence. We then switch to the second half of our game as we are reintroduced to our second antagonist, Abby. We see a younger her looking for her dad, finding out that he'd run off to go help animals. One of the few things framed in this series as more or less a true innocence in this world. After we meet him, we are quickly rushed back to where they come from, the Firefly Hospital, as they have just found the girl who could make their miracle cure. They discuss the ethics of what they're doing, if they are making the right decision, if they can risk even asking her permission, and if it was his own daughter, what he would do. And obviously he wouldn't be able to do it. But Abby comes in and says that if it was her, she would want him to, as we've seen Ellie also wish that. We then see the hospital from Abby's perspective as Joel rampages through, killing everyone, including Abby's father, the lead surgeon, the one who was willing to fight back to save the cure. So of course, in the first game, we killed him without thought. As we get back to the first day that Abby and Dina made it to Seattle, as this game is pretty much broken up into the several days that they're in Seattle for the majority. We find she's cold and jaded, and that the Wolves, or the WLF, are almost nothing like that of the Fireflies, more akin to Jackson, but more militarized, with a dictator or leader referred to often but not shown. Throughout the first several days with Abby, we are mostly reintroduced to all the characters that were there for Joel's death, giving them a more human side, whether their beliefs are good or not, as we find out that the Wolves are in a rather rough war with the religious cult, the Scars, who don't believe in using technology from the quote-unquote old days. They are framed as almost savages by the Wolves, with their weapons and forts of wood and crude tools and brutal practices shown from even Ellie's point of view moving through the city as they hang people and gut them. The Abby half on a whole is a lot less emotionally driven at first, as the game has the difficult job of taking a complex and morally gray-leaning bad character that we've been shown killing a character that means a lot to Ellie with so little remorse, and making her somebody we care about. But it goes about this by having Abby herself not like herself, not like who she's become, how much killing she's done. She doesn't regret killing Joel because, again, he deserved it, but she does regret having to kill so many people in this conflict, as we see through flashbacks that she also regrets the way her former relationship with Owen, before he had one with Mel, ended. As Ellie's story is a sad and painful nosedive towards becoming what she never wanted to be, Abby's is a look forward and a look up to maybe find some form of redemption for what she's done. And this is allowed to be fully realized as we get introduced to two new characters, as Abby gets captured by the Scars and is about to meet the same brutal fate that we've seen hanging throughout Seattle. Two Scars drag forward a young girl, a Scar. She is referred to as the other Scars as a apostate, and is ordered to have her wings clipped as they take a hammer to one of her elbows. Just as they move on to the next, Abby's still left hanging in the background. An arrow flies by, shot by Lev. Yara, the girl on the ground, fights back, and Abby helps kill them rather brutally, but in doing so, kicking the bucket that Abby was balancing on, and she starts to hang. But the two kids decide to help her as she's sitting there choking. And you, with Yara and Lev, these two children Scars, set up actually earlier that the wolves had killed children Scars before, fight infected together and move to temporary safety. Abby seems to genuinely feel for them, but quickly leaves to go back on her hunt for Owen, after which she goes to the aquarium where Owen is hiding because he supposedly killed a wolf himself, trying to allegedly save a Scar. After talking with Owen and feeling more guilty about her past, and with Owen talking of leaving and looking for more fireflies elsewhere, she goes back to look for them, finding Yara's shattered arm in worse condition, life-threatening condition. She takes them to the aquarium and convinces Owen and now Mel, who showed up and is a doctor, to help save Yara, who will die if they don't cut her arm off. But they don't have the tools they need to operate, so Abby and Lev set off to go and try to get supplies from the wolves without being seen. This section is honestly one of my favorites of the entire game. Although it seems simple, the moving through mostly infected as we get to know Lev and Abby more and we're shown more of the good, almost motherly side of her. Lev and Yara were being treated so badly by the Scars because Lev had shaved his head, something that only the men were allowed to do, as he himself is a trans boy who, before doing this, had been assigned to marry some warrior. I think this is another really interesting point of representation in this game. It feels so naturally fit for this world, and also gives us the only non-violent conflict I can think of for Lev and Yara to run into that makes the Scars want to kill them while also staying completely sympathetic. We finally make it to the wolf base where the supplies they need for the operation is, and Abby, who has now been missing for a couple days looking for Owen, someone who is already in hot water with the wolves, goes in without Lev to try and quickly get in and get out, but finds that they are about to plan some kind of attack on the Scars Island, trying to once and for all end the war. And also that this Isaac guy probably isn't such a great guy after all. Abby gets detained, then one of your friends breaks you out, and you have to venture into the depths of this hospital to find the supplies. This hospital that just so happens to be ground zero for the infected. Cue Rat King.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah, what's going on there, pal?
Oh my God, I just found a rat's nest. Slaughtered about 200 of them.
200? Couldn't be. That's...
Christ. It's like whole generations of those things have died at my hands, and mothers, fathers, grandfathers, little baby rats.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you know, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
He's so freaking scary in this game. In fact, Abby gets the most scary run-ins with infected, and surprisingly enough, this game leans a lot less on the infected than even the first game did, as they become more just a nuisance and a part of life, and the things that we mostly kill in this game are other people, a much harder and more consequential action. Anyway, we beat the Rat King, head back to the aquarium, and the surgery is good. But in the recovery process, and more drama with the trio of subordinates, as Mel thinks Abby is a bad person only helping these kids to try and impress Owen, which we know from Abby's perspective isn't true, but it also hurts because we as Abby still think of ourselves as a bad person. And Owen, who is actually very impressed by what Abby is doing, decides to, have sex with Abby. And during all of this, our lovable but naive partner in crime, Lev, runs back to the Scars Island to try and convince his mom, the one who tried to get him killed in the first place, to come with them, because she's his mom. After Owen and Abby have sex, the very suspicious and upset Mel makes sure that Owen stays behind as you and Yara now go off to try and rescue Lev. Now we have the opportunity to get more of Lev's story and also to get to know Yara this time around. And I just love the simplicity and enjoyability of these sections with Abby and one of the kids. They somehow really get me invested into these slower moments where Yara is explaining that, similar to a lot of modern day religions in our world, the Scars or Seraphites are completely twisting the message of what the religious text itself stands for. As we take this one group that was seemingly a third party of straight evil to both Ellie and Abby, much like many of the similar things we run into in the first game, and we once again twist it to maybe these people are people too. Also, somehow this section is really more engaging than running around with Ellie and Dina when they first get into Seattle because there's less looting involved and a much more linear story. But we get to the island, we make it to Lev, and on the way all hell breaks loose as the wolves were planning their big war-ending attack right in the middle of while we are trying to go find Lev. And despite getting to Lev without much issue, we find him in complete shock, having been cut up by his mom and having to fight back. And on our way out, the war kicking up into high gear. We run into Isaac, who promptly, even with your begging and explaining, kills Yara, and tries to do the same with the rest of you, as we are now yet again filled with the game's rage, this time towards the wolves and the war in general, as we start to fight them in full force as well as the Scars, where before, Abby mostly tried to hide from the wolves because she knew most of them, some of them even recognizing you as they try and kill you. Now, you're trying to kill them in full force. Anyway, a whole big, long, brutal, surprisingly visceral war sequence later, as you fight that impossible-to-kill guy, and we make it through these surprisingly realistic and overwhelmingly assaulting attacks, we manage to make it all the way through the chaos and get back to the aquarium. But we've timeline caught up with Ellie, and before we realize what's happening, we walk in to find a murdered Owen and Mel. Also finding the marked up map we had been making as Ellie throughout the game that she had dropped in the shock at what she had done. Cut to you as Abby and Lev at the theater, which is again home base for Ellie and Dina as you break in looking for yet again revenge. We get the drop on Tommy. We kill Jesse as he runs in on us, and a fight ensues. Tommy is badly injured, and then we have an Ellie boss fight where we slowly have to take her down and rid her of her weapons as they beat each other up Spy Kids 2 style.
Headbutt!
Eventually, Dina comes to try and save you and gets shot by Lev, and Abby starts to beat her, at this point sitting in a room of characters you've come to love where all of them want to kill each other, and Ellie begs for her to stop with Dina, that she's the one she should want to kill. She's the girl who's going to be the cure, and she's the one responsible for Joel killing her father. But Abby, caught up in the moment, wants to kill Dina, wants to kill them all. And even when Ellie says that she's pregnant, she says good, because so is Mel. And doesn't she deserve it? She does deserve it, right? Lev ends up stopping her as Abby realizes that continuing this would just keep leading to more and more pain, and she didn't want to have any more regrets from killing people. So she just lets them go. Cut to black. We then go to an undisclosed amount of time later as Ellie and Dina are living in a beautiful farmhouse, as they talked about previously in the game, and they are raising the baby that Dina was pregnant with earlier. And for an instant, they seem happy. It seems like the perfect epilogue. But again, life is never really that simple, and despite the trauma Ellie had been through, she hadn't really learned anything or gotten any closure. In fact, what she had gotten out of the whole experience was severe PTSD and regret, seemingly being happy in the moments with Dina, but not really. And she's not really the same girl we knew at the beginning of the game. An injured and spiteful Tommy shows up to their house. He's separated from his wife and has grown no less anxious for his revenge as he's found a lead to where Abby went, but he can't go himself anymore. So he verbally assaults and guilt trips her before Dina kicks him out of the house. But we already know it's too late. We play Joel's song on the guitar one last time, and we remember that night of the dance. The one that everyone was talking about in the beginning. Jesse being his lovable self, Dina making a move on Ellie. Everything is bathed in beautiful, out-of-focus lighting, like a dream. They kiss, and then get accosted by homophobic sandwich man.
What you got there?
Bigot sandwiches.
And Joel tries to come in and stop him, making Ellie even more upset. When we remember the last thing Ellie ever said to him, "I don't need your help." Ellie, at the crack of dawn, packs her bag, and we run into Dina on our way out, who heartbreakingly pleads with Ellie to let it go, to choose her family now, to choose Dina. But Ellie has to go, and Dina says that she won't do it again. She can't wait for her to probably never come back. She can't live with that, or raise a baby by herself on a farm by herself. So if she goes, they won't have this again. And of course, Ellie still goes. This decision to have one last section at first seemed kind of annoying to me. As I was playing and trying to beat this game, ended up playing for like 4 hours because I thought I was really close to the end, but then we had this entire thing. But the more I think about it, with Ellie's character arc, which hadn't really been finished, and again what the game is going for overall, it's grown on me, despite being one of the only poorly paced parts of the game. And yet again, like the first game, giving you an insanely overpowered gun right at the end for a big fight, which feels a little cheap still, but a little less so because I just wanted to get through everything and it was useful for that. We track Abby down the coastline as she had finally found signs of the fireflies again. They're out there trying to spread the light. But in doing this search, she gets her and Lev captured by a group that seemingly seems to lock people up and force them to fight, I think. I don't know, it's not really important. Ellie then makes her way tracking Abby through all of this, killing everyone brutally in her path, all the way to the heart of their base, but getting badly wounded in the process, until she frees some prisoners and finds out that Lev and Abby were left to be tortured for trying to escape. Left hanging out by the beach, we find an almost unrecognizable Abby. Her hair has been cut, her face is bruised and bleeding, and she looks like she's been starving. Ellie cuts her down, and Abby cuts Lev down, who's hanging out there passed out. And at first, it seems like she's gonna let them go, as you all walk to boats together. But Ellie just can't. At first, Abby won't fight back. At this point, both of these characters equally hurt, and Abby, having already tried to start moving on, and also having just been through all of this, she just can't do it. But Ellie threatens the passed out Lev. So they fight yet again. This time, as you can imagine, Ellie gets the upper hand. But yet again, like Abby, she just can't finish it. Because why does Abby deserve this any more than she does? And one of the only sections of the story I would call clunky outside of the initial introduction to the large map of Seattle, this moment is a key moment for our character. Our main character, Ellie. Despite it being split in more or less half, we still spend longer time with Ellie than Abby. She's the character that we know more, and she's the hardest character to watch and play through in this game, as pretty much through the course of this game, the little world she has left crumbles, mainly due to herself, and she has to just sit there in the fog, realizing that all of it was pointless. Jesse's death was pointless. All of the revenge and all of the people she killed, it was all pointless. And she heads back home, now missing 2 fingers from the fight, and much like our persevering, ever-lovable hobbit, she finds out that there's not much of a home to return to. In fact, there's no home. The house is almost completely clear. As you can imagine, Dina didn't and couldn't stay. Everything is cleared out except for Ellie's art, her journal, which she had been making throughout the game, her albums, and Joel's guitar, the one with the moth on it. We pick it up to play one last time, barely able to make the song due to the loss of our fret fingers, and we cut to Joel, playing, illuminated by a porch light, as Ellie walks up to him, and we find out that they had one more conversation before Joel died. At first about nothing in particular, because what do you say? But soon the conversation moves to Dina, as Ellie is still self-conscious about the weird situation and a kiss from a girl she's liked, but also has so much baggage. And Joel remarks that he may not know her well, or know her intentions, but that she'd be lucky to have her. As Ellie's mind, full of too many conflicts and situations, lands back on the hospital. She claims she was supposed to die, that her life would have mattered, and now that's gone because of him. And Joel tells her directly that if he ever had a chance to redo that moment, every single time, he would pick exactly what he did.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
And they share a moment together as the score builds and we stay with Joel as Ellie leaves. In the background, the porch light still visible as he rests, and we see a moth fly by the light. Cut back to Ellie, and she looks towards her brightly lit window from her dark room, leaves the guitar as the score kicks in, and we pan up, filling the frame with the light of the window, and we see her leave, and as I like to believe it, to find Dina. Cue credits. What an ending. There's a lot to unpack here that I can't begin to start on simply because I think different people will take completely different things from this game. But for me, it all comes down to that tattoo and to the moths. We end on the note coming back to the same question that plagued the first game. Is what Joel did right? Is Joel a good person? And what I think it lands on is the perfect encapsulation of the heart of the games. There is no right answer for if what he did was right. In fact, it was probably very bad, and it had very serious consequences. He ended several people's lives. But wouldn't you do the same for someone you loved? Joel is a bad person, yes, but he was also a human. He cared, he loved, and most importantly, he wanted to do better. And throughout the game, we spend our runtime going with two characters with drastically different personalities that both embody part of this question and part of what Joel is. But instead, if you'll allow me to reach a bit here, the game asks us to not just think about this as a Joel and Ellie question, but to look beyond and see what their relationship represents. It represents growth and love and being human together. The light that the moth chases isn't the fireflies, as you might initially think. It's their love. Real love. Whether it's friendships and weird drama between exes and new romances, or fatherly love for a girl you see as your own daughter that you lost, or even love for a boy that you can help as you both try and find redemption. It's growth as we have to learn to let go and to move on and to not let anger and hate to consume us, to become more than the nature of the world, to move through the struggle that will always be there of hate and anger and malice and go towards the light of each other as real humans. And I know this is put to the settings of extremes. We're not living in a zombie apocalypse or going on revenge quests for our surrogate father figures, I hope. But especially in the time that this game was released in, the release itself a product of the pandemic, and our political and religious waters being stirred up to a scary level, it's easy to forget to keep moving forward. It's easy to get lost in the ever-growing weeds of despair, feeling like there's nothing left to do but hate. or sit in an empty fog and wait. But this game, at least for me, especially coming through a mentally hard month, has reminded me that no matter how rough it gets, how overwhelmed and confusing it is, how much relationship drama or how many scary and tragic world events go on, we're all only human, flawed and beautiful. And we all have the choice to move towards love, to move beyond the battle of light and dark, and simply grow together. Again, just like Ellie's tattoo, which she carries with her the entire game. The meaning completely transforms as we as an audience reclaim the meaning of the tattoo. No longer something that she just had as a reminder of Joel, or something made by a previous ex because she thought it was cool, but something that can give her hope that everything might possibly be okay again, that she might actually be able to find that light, even though she felt like she didn't have purpose anymore. She finds purpose in Dina, even if she realizes it a little too late. I think this game is about the most definitive version of this universe you can get. A game that feels so much more comforting and optimistic, with beautiful relationships and a broad cast of complex characters, but that also has a message that I feel like we could all use sometimes, even if it does take it to its extremes. And yeah, the game design is still a little rough. I honestly agree with a lot of Nikki Jakey's points about game design in general, and that this needs to be moved away from. It's outdated and sloppy and leaves a lot to be desired, and truly left a bad precedent for the gaming industry. But I believe that it works so much better in this game than the first, because the gameplay elements communicate a powerful and visceral experience to you that isn't just looting. And again, just like the tattoo, we can pull our own meaning from it despite its history. I honestly am hard-pressed to think of a better story game like this, and it might just take the cake over Uncharted 4 as my favorite game from Naughty Dog, and my favorite story game like this, despite what Uncharted 4 has meant to me. I know it's weird to say, especially being that there are still tons of games out there with more and better mechanics that feel more well suited for a video game, but honestly they pull it off in such a way that I wouldn't want this game adapted to something else. This is almost as close to a perfect version of this story as you can get, save for some repetition and pacing problems, and the imagery and meaning I pulled from something as simple as an in-game, verily talked about tattoo has stood out to me as something I haven't stopped thinking about since, and I can't really deny that. So maybe you should give this game another chance. Try viewing it as separate from the conceptions you already have, and try getting lost in the very things that the game wants you to. Coming to the realization that Joel isn't all there is, that there's tomorrow without them. And while it'll never be the same, it can still be bright, because there's always going to be light and dark, but we can choose to move towards the people we love anyway. Or maybe this game just isn't for you, and that's perfectly fair too. Thanks for watching. But yeah, this is a clear favorite of mine so far, and what I might say is the masterpiece of the series, even if that is a tad bit controversial. If you'd like to see me elaborate more on the first game, you can go check out that video, and be sure to stick around because I'm not done with this series yet, and will soon be moving towards the show, which I'm now very, very curious to see how it turns out after being so in love with this portrayal of the characters, even more so than the first game, which honestly I think the first game's story would work better for a show. Shout out to my Patreon supporter, Robbie Grayway. Very, very, very cool. If you want to show support to the channel at any amount, you can go to patreon.com/mgraywayfilms. Also, check out the links in the description if you want to see more from me, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I love you all. Good night.